as the tempered point bit through plate after plate. "What's the idea, Steve?" Nadia asked, when he had re-entered the control room. "Now you'll have all that pumping to do over again." "Protection for the mirrors," he explained. "You see, they aren't perfect reflectors. There's a little absorption, so that some stuff comes through. Not much, of course, but enough to kill some of those Titanians, and almost enough to ruin their ship got through in about 10 minutes, and only one enemy was dealing it out. We can stand more than they could, of course, but the mirror itself won't stand much more heat than it was absorbing then. But with air in those spaces instead of vacuum, and with the whole mass of the Hope, except this one lifeboat, as cold as it is, I figured that there'll be enough conduction and convection through them to keep the outer wall and the mirror cool enough at least, to hold the mirror on for an hour. If only one ship tackles us, it won't be bad, but I figure that if there's only one, we're lucky." Stephen's fears were only too well grounded, for during the evening of the following day, while he was carefully scanning the heavens for some sign of enemy craft, the alarm bell over his head burst into its brazen clamor. Instantly he shot out the detectors and ultralights and saw not one but 6 of the deadly globes, almost upon them, at point-blank range. One was already playing a beam of force upon the forlorn Hope, and the other 5 went into action immediately upon feeling the detector impulses, and perceiving that the weapon of their sister ship had encountered an unusual resistance in the material of that peculiarly mirrored wedge. As those terrific forces struck her, the terrestrial cruiser became a vast pyrotechnic set-piece, a dazzling fountain of coruscant brilliance. For the mirror held. The enemy beams shot back upon themselves and rebounded in all directions, in the same spectacular exhibition of frenzied incandescence which had marked the resistance of the Titanian sphere to a similar attack. But Stevens was not idle. In the instance of launching his detectors, as fast as he could work the trips, 4 of the frightful nitrogen bombs of Titan, all that he could handle at once, shot out into space, their rocket tubes flaring viciously. The enemy detectors of course located the flying torpedoes immediately, but, contemptuous of material projectiles, the spheres made no attempt to dodge, but merely lashed out upon them with their ravening rays. So close was the range that they had no time to avoid the radio-directed bombs after discovering that their beams were useless against the unknown protective covering of those mirrored shells. There were 4 practically simultaneous detonations, silent but terrific explosions as the pent-up internal energy of solid pentavalent nitrogen was instantaneously released, and the 4 insensately murderous spheres disappeared into jagged fragments of wreckage, flying wildly away from the centers of explosion. One great mass of riven and twisted metal was blown directly upon the 5th globe, and Nadia stared in horrified fascination at the silent crash as the entire side of the ship crumpled inward like a shell of cardboard under the awful impact. That vessel was probably out of action, but Stevens was taking no chances. As soon as he had clamped a pale blue tractor rod upon the 6th and last of the enemy fleet, he drove a torpedo through the gaping wall and into the interior of the helpless war vessel. There he exploded it, and the awful charge, detonated in that confined space, literally tore the globular spaceship to bits. "We'll show these jaspers what kind of trees make shingles," he gritted between clenched teeth, and his eyes, hard now as gray iron, fairly emitted sparks as he launched 4 torpedoes upon the sole remaining globe of the Squadron of the Void. "I've had a lot of curiosity to know just what kind of unnatural monstrosities can possibly have such fiendish dispositions as they've got. But beasts, men or devils, they'll find they've grabbed something this time they can't let go of." And fierce blasts of energy ripped from the exhaust as he drove his missiles, at their highest possible acceleration, toward the captive sphere, so savagely struggling at the extremity of his tractor beam. but that one remaining vessel was to prove no such easy victim as had its sister ships. Being 6-1, and supposedly invincible, the squadron had been overconfident and had attacked carelessly, with only its crippling slicing beams instead of its more deadly weapons of total destruction. And so fierce and hard had been Stephen's counterattack that 5 of its numbers had been destroyed before they realized what powerful armament was mounted by that apparently crude, helpless, and innocuous wedge. The 6th, however, was fully warned, and every resource at the command of its hellish crew was now being directed against the forlorn hope. Sheets, cones, and gigantic rods of force flashed and crackled. Space was filled with silent, devastating tongues of flame. The forlorn hope was dragged about erratically as the sphere tried to dodge those hurtling torpedoes, tried to break away from the hawser of energy anchoring her so solidly to her opponent. But the linkage held, and closer Stevens drove the fourfold menace of his frightful dirigible bombs. Pressor beams beat upon them in vain. Hard driven as those pushers were, they could find no footing, but were reflected at many angles by that untouchable mirror, and their utmost force scarcely impeded the progress of the rocket-propelled missiles. Comparatively small as the projectiles were, however, they soon felt the effects of the prodigious beams of heat enveloping them, and torpedo after torpedo exploded harmlessly in space as their mirrors warmed up and volatilized. But for each bomb that was lost, Stevens launched another, and each one came closer to its objective than had its predecessor. Made desperate by the failure of his every beam, the enemy commander thought to use material projectiles himself, weapons abandoned long since by his race as antiquated and inefficient, but a few of which were still carried by the older types of vessels. One such shell was found and launched, but in the instant of its launching, Stevens' foremost bomb struck its mark and exploded. So close were the other 3 bombs that they also let go at the shock, and the warlike sphere, hemmed in by 4 centers of explosions, flew apart, literally pulverized. Its projectile, so barely discharged, did not explode. It was loaded with material which could be detonated only by the warhead upon impact, or by a radio signal. It was, however, deflected markedly from its course by the force of the blast, so that instead of striking the forlorn hope in direct central impact, its head merely touched the apex of the mirror-plated wedge. That touch was enough. There was another appalling concussion, another blinding glare, and the entire front quarter of the terrestrial vessel had gone to join the shattered globes. Between the point of explosion and the lifeboats, there had been many channels of insulation, many bulkheads, many air brakes, and compartment after compartment of accumulator cells. These had borne the brunt of the explosion, so that the control room was unharmed, and Stevens swung his communicator rapidly through the damaged portions of the vessels. "How badly are we hurt, Steve? Can we make it to Ganymede?" Nadia was quietly staring over his shoulder into the plate, studying with him the pictures of destruction there portrayed as he flashed the projector from compartment to compartment. "We're hurt, no fooling, but it might have been a lot worse," he replied, as he completed the survey. "We've lost about all of our accumulators, but we can land on our own beam, and landing power is all we want, I think. You see, we're drifting straight for where Ganymede will be, and we'd better cut out every bit of power we're using, even the heaters, until we get there. This lifeboat will hold heat for quite a while, and I'd rather get pretty cold than meet any more of that gang. I figured 8 hours just before they met us, and we were just about drifting then. I think it's safe to say 7 hours blind." "But can't they detect us anyway? They may have sent out a call, you know." "If we aren't using any power for anything, their electromagnetics are the only things we'll register on, and they're mighty short-range finders. Even if they should get that close to us, they'll probably think we're meteoric, since we'll be dead to their other instruments. Luckily, we've got lots of air, so the chemical purifiers can handle it without power. I'll shut off everything